And so tonight, the Israeli mission has gone beyond wiping out the PLO. They are now creating new facts, as the Israelis like to say, creating a new political and military situation in Lebanon aimed at getting rid of the Syrian army and restoring sovereignty to the Lebanese government. Bill Siemens, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Lebanon long ago suffered a nervous breakdown. Now a great many observers believe Israel may be bent on altering its political balance forever, encouraging a new state dominated by right-wing Christians. Israel's land offensives in both the eastern and central sectors are cutting off Syrian forces from their homeland and have put Israel in position to link up with Lebanon's right-wing Christian militias, which are as determined as Israel to crush the Palestinians and drive the Syrian forces out. It's ironic that in 1976, Syria intervened in Lebanon's civil war to protect the then weak Christians against the Palestinians and the leftist Lebanese. Israelis speak of re-establishing a sovereign government in Lebanon, but the Christians are the most powerful now, with Israeli support, and have little interest in sharing power with the majority Muslims. In Lebanon, the failure to share power equitably has always been a recipe for disaster, and it has never led to a more secure Israel. Despite the president's call for Israel to stop the fighting in Lebanon, it is as fierce as ever. The Israelis, who still have the initiative, continue to fight with both Palestinians and Syrians. Israel says today it shot down at least 25 more Syrian fighter planes and 2 combat helicopters. Israel says it's now shot down at least 61 Syrian planes since the invasion began. Independent verification in such a situation is virtually impossible. Syria has not made a statement on losses, but says that Israel has been bombing civilians during what it calls a 3-pronged attack into the Bekaa Valley along the Syrian-Lebanese frontier. The Syrian president, Hafez al-Assad, says Israel cannot be allowed to control Lebanon. Israel continues to push its offensive in the center of the country, and on the western Mediterranean side, Israel has been bombing Beirut, the capital. The PLO says 10,000 civilians have been killed or wounded since the invasion. It doesn't say how that figure was arrived at. Israel says it's achieved most of its war aims. Tonight, Israel has never been closer to nor more in control of an Arab capital. Israeli forces have completely sealed West and South Beirut, and by doing so, they say, 6,000 Palestinian fighters have been trapped. So have thousands of civilians. And Lebanon's presidential palace at Babda on the southeastern rim of the city is under virtual Israeli control, as is the headquarters of the Lebanese army. The Israelis have linked up with their right-wing Christian allies, and to the west, on the edge of the sea, they have now captured Beirut's international airport. Our first report is from ABC's Bill Siemens. As he is based in Israel, his reports are subject to censorship.
Israeli heavy artillery fired all through the day towards Beirut, but this evening there are reports that the firing has tapered off. Chief of Staff Raphael Eitan said tonight that the Israelis are in control of Beirut Airport, which is lying off under that pall of smoke about 3 miles from our camera position. The Israelis pounded the PLO's strong points around the airport. They have also cut off the Damascus highway to the east, and they have linked up with the Christian forces. Eitan said the Israelis do not intend to take the city, but are determined to wipe out all PLO headquarters in the area. Tonight, Eitan said the PLO forces are on their knees begging for a ceasefire.
This is Pierre Salinger in Paris. ABC News has learned that the Israelis are in contact with the leadership of the PLO in West Beirut and have asked for the surrender of 10 top leaders of the Palestinian organization, including its chairman, Yasser Arafat. In addition, the Israelis have called on the Palestinian army to put down its arms and to leave Beirut, to be transferred to prison camps. According to a top Palestinian source I reached in Beirut by telephone from Paris, the messages are being passed from the Israelis to the PLO through intermediaries at the American University in Beirut. In these messages, the Israelis have threatened to assault West Beirut, where Arafat and his command center are now trapped if their conditions are not met. But the PLO representative in London said the Palestinians are prepared to resist to the end.
Mr. Arafat will lead the battle until the victory or to die.
The fact is, the Palestinians do not believe the Israeli threat. They are so entrenched in West Beirut that they believe the Israelis would suffer massive losses if they entered the city. Thus, they are prepared to turn down the Israeli demands and resist to the death if the Israelis decide to attack. Pierre Salinger, ABC News, Paris.
International criticism of the Israeli occupation has not eased up, and today the French organization Doctors Without Frontiers said it was refused permission to set up an emergency hospital in Sidon. The medical team quoted an Israeli colonel as telling them, "If you work in the Lebanese hospital, we will send you out of the country." The French doctor in charge of the team said nearly 200 doctors in Sidon were ready to work, but they were not allowed to pick up the wounded.
Under all circumstances, the inherent right of self-defense.
Two-thirds of the United Nations boycotted Prime Minister Begin's defense of the Lebanon invasion. A lot of the world has begun to see Israel differently.
Israel was always that gallant little underdog democracy fighting for survival against all the odds. Now the Israelis have annexed East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, settled down more or less permanently on the West Bank, and occupied close to half of Lebanon. In the interests of self-defense, that gallant little underdog, Israel, has suddenly started behaving like the neighborhood bully.
Israel had its way here in South Lebanon against Washington's wishes and got what it wanted. From Beirut south to Israel's border, there is peace of sorts, a peace the United Nations force was never able to keep. The United Nothings, the Israelis call them. The roads are jammed with Israeli troops going back and forth from the front and Lebanese civilians just going back and forth, looking for some safety. The PLO is gone, but in the process, cities like Sidon, population 80,000, took a terrible beating from Israeli bombs and shells. A quarter of it was destroyed. The PLO had spread itself out among the population, so a lot of innocent people got in the way. Israel insists civilian dead were in the hundreds. The Red Cross says it was more like 9,000. Perhaps 250,000 are homeless. Nobody knows for sure. The Israelis killed more than 2,000 PLO fighters and captured thousands more. Another 6,000 they have bottled up in West Beirut, where the war goes on.
After the death.
Yasser Arafat told ABC News this week he will stay and fight to the last. Once in Jordan and now here, he has tried to make war against Israel from a country not his own. In this war, most of the Arab world left the PLO to fend for itself. And nobody knows what's to become of the 400,000 Palestinians in Lebanon who don't carry a gun. The war has turned many of them back into refugees. Israel will not want them next door, raising a new generation of guerrillas. And Palestinians, of course, don't have a home to go to. Prime Minister Begin and President Reagan have agreed they want a free and independent Lebanon, a sort of Mideast Finland. That's not likely to happen here. Lebanon has never been a country so much as a compromise, imperfect at that. Its 3 million people are an impossible jumble of race and language and religion. Israel would like its friends, the Lebanese Christians, to run the country, but they don't want to be seen as Israel's errand boys. Israel would like it even better if there were U.S. troops here to keep the peace, but Washington is not eager to send American boys to a place like this. Israel has promised to send its army home as soon as all's well in Lebanon, but that looks to be a very long time. In Sidon, at least, they were beginning to put things back together this week. The Lebanese are old hands at cleaning up after somebody else's war, and they're suddenly remembering they really didn't like the PLO anyway. As for Israel, it has never been more secure, and never quite so alone in the world. It has confounded its enemies, and it has commanded fear and respect. But it is not the Israel its first prime minister, Ben-Gurion, always imagined it would be. That Israel, that light unto the nations. Richard Threlkeld, ABC News in South Lebanon.
Tonight we have a special report from Geraldo Rivera, who has just returned from Lebanon, on the torment of the nation and the emergence of a leader determined to restore peace to his people.
As anyone who's seen the sights and listened to the sounds of war on their television sets for the last month knows very well, the Battle of Lebanon has been ferocious. The 3 foreign armies who fought and died here have decimated this hapless country. The big question for the Lebanese people, though, is what happens now, and whether or not they'll ever be able to rebuild this war-torn country.